Hello everyone, and welcome to another installment of Draco Veritas. So, as per all of my other readings, trigger warnings apply, all of them. If that is just something you do not want to engage in, I completely understand. And I don't think I have... Oh, there was one thing I wanted to say before we got into this. So, I have started putting my Sailor Moon fanfiction up on here. I debated for a while about whether or not I wanted to do this other fanfic that Cassandra Clare had recommended in the Harry Potter world. And the answer is yeah, I will be doing that one, but later, because it is also a chapter fic. So I didn't necessarily want to have two chapter Harry Potter fics going at the same time. But as previously stated, I believe a few months ago, I had planned to read that fic as well, and then after the conclusion of this trilogy and then that fic, that will be it for Harry Potter on here, and you will be seeing nothing but Sailor Moon from here on out, as my fanfiction preservation project of that particular fandom continues. So, without further ado, let us just get right into it. Chapter 11. The Hostility of Dreams. The fire in the common room was high, and Hermione sat in front of it, willing herself to sleep, but so far was having no luck. It wasn't as if she weren't tired from the day, but thoughts of Harry with her in the potions dungeon kept invading her mind. She kept seeing the watch on his wrist, the one she knew had been left in Draco's room the last time she saw it. When had Draco given it back to him? Or had he sent Harry down to the Slytherin common room to retrieve it? She opened her hands in her lap and stared at them. They were black in places where ink had stained the nails from work that day. She had tried to scrub it off in the girls' bathroom, but they stubbornly refused to be cleaned. She wondered if she should go back to the infirmary and ask Draco about the watch, but she was in her nightgown now, and didn't feel much like going back upstairs for a robe. There was a faint creaking noise on the tower stairs, and Hermione lifted her head, then gave a startled yelp. He stood at the front of the boys' dormitory, looking at her, hands in his pockets. He was not wearing the clothes that Ginny had described him wearing to the wedding, but something else entirely. It was more elegant, and probably the richest item she had seen him wear to date. Feeling as if she were somehow in a dream, and looking at a vision of him, Hermione opened her mouth and said his name, very softly, into the still common room. "Ron?" she said, and then more loudly, "Ron!" She stood up suddenly and started towards him. "When did you get here? How did you get in? Are you all right? We've all been so worried about you." He did not reply, only smiled. She had never seen him smile like that. It was a sharp, bright smile, like the edge of a knife. Suddenly unnerved, without being able to explain why, she stopped in her tracks and stared at him. "Ron," she said, "is something wrong?" He appeared not to hear her, but took the last step down the stairs, still smiling. In the faint firelight, his expression was hard to read. His eyes looked blue-black, the color of a pansy flower. So dark, the irises seemed to meld with the pupil. "Hermione," he said at last, and the sound of her name made her shiver. His voice was so familiar, and yet suddenly not familiar at all. "How have you been since I've been gone?" Instinctively, Hermione drew back a step. "I just told you," she said. "We've all been terribly worried." "Were you, Hermione? Were you really?" The edged smile widened with a deadly sort of amusement as he began to walk across the room towards her. Hermione felt something in the back of her mind begin to stir. What was going on? Why was he acting so strange? "We should really get you home to the Barrow," she said, willing her voice not to betray her unease. "Why? Are you anxious to get rid of me?" "Of course not, Ron. It's only that your mother will be so relieved to see you." She heard the uncertainty in her own voice. The fine hairs along her arms and the back of her neck were prickling sharply. "It's all right," he said, and there was an odd tenderness in his voice as he reached out and lightly touched the edge of her hair, just at her temple. "I just came here to say goodbye to Harry. You wouldn't grudge me a goodbye, would you, Hermione?" His hand was cool against the side of her face. "Why do you keep saying my name?" Instead of answering her, he dropped his hand from her face, skated his fingers along the edge of her shoulder, then pulled her sharply towards him. The suddenness of the movement caught her off guard, and she half fell against him. He seemed to expect this, taking her weight easily, his arms sliding around her. They were wrapped together now like lovers, and he felt like wrong against her. The same slender build, the same red hair, but the voice was someone else's, and she could now see that the eyes that gazed down at hers weren't Ron's somehow. "Why didn't you come looking for me, Hermione?" he asked. "You knew I was taken away by Lucius to the Dark Lord. Why didn't you come? You and Harry." She jerked hard against him, but his grip was so tight it hurt. There was a humming in her ears like static electricity. "You're not Ron," she whispered. "Who are you?" "You're the cleverest witch in the school," he said. "Who do you think I am?" Her mind racing, she looked up at him, and for a moment it was as if she could see through Ron's eyes to whoever lay behind them. Eyes like blue ink, narrow mouth like a razor cut, and the mind behind it all something twisted and cruel. And then she remembered the book she had been reading that day, and how the translation for the word cup still nagged at her every time she went to read it again. Perhaps the word hadn't meant cup after all, but something different, something much more sinister. Then she remembered Ron's dormant divination skills, and how they might not seem very useful to him, but might be to someone much more powerful. "You're Voldemort," she said at last. He smiled his razor smile again. "Very clever." Horror had begun to replace her shock, and Hermione began to shake as she asked, "Are you going to kill me?" For a moment he did not move. "Yes, I think so," he said. "You wouldn't deny me the opportunity to destroy the one thing that Harry Potter loves best in the world, would you?" Hermione wanted to open her mouth to scream, but knew that there was no one left in the dorms. Harry and Ginny hadn't returned from wherever they had gone. They were all alone. Despite knowing that, and knowing that it was useless, she did open her mouth and did the one thing she thought might give her a fighting chance. She spit in Ron's eye. He cursed and dropped one of his hands away from her, and Hermione had just enough time to free her right hand and hit him as hard as she could in the jaw. He gave a pained grunt, then looked back at her, eyes flashing. "You little bitch!" he rasped, and drew back his hand, and Hermione knew in that instant that if he was allowed to hit her back, she would die. Ron was strong, and growing up with all those brothers meant that fistfights were common. She would be helpless if he got the best of her. She reached for her wand, then remembered that it was upstairs, in her room. Frantic, she did the only other thing she could think of, and grabbed one of the candlesticks from the nearest table and swung it like a bat towards his head. Surprised, he attempted to duck, but not before Hermione's swing caught him on the side of the temple, and he went sprawling to the ground, a fine gash having opened on the side of his head. Not wanting to see if he would get up, Hermione turned as quick as lightning and ran for the portrait hole. She opened it, the candlestick still clutched in her hand, and began to run down the corridor, screaming loud enough to wake every single portrait down the hall as she went. Outside the train window, the scenery slid by peacefully. Mountains had given way to hills to flat country dotted with trees and small towns. The snow had melted away, though ice still sparkled in nets against the windows of passing houses and between the branches of trees. Harry sat and looked out the window of the express train from Hogsmeade and tried not to think. He had lain down on the stiffly padded seats, his bag under his head, and tried to sleep, but after a time had found himself drawn to staring out the window instead. Perhaps it was that it was so cold in the compartment, and the scar on his hand was bothering him. A sound drew his attention, and Harry looked up, expecting the trolley witch. But it was Ron. He was sitting across from Harry, and was looking at him somewhat guardedly. "I must be more tired than I realized," he thought. "I was just thinking," said the image of Ron without preamble, "that you've never taken a train without me before, have you?" Harry shook his head. "No. How is it?" Harry looked back out the window. The sky outside was darkening, and the window gave him back his own reflection. Pale skin, green eyes, hair like tangled black thread, but without his scar and glasses. "It's lonely," he said. "I never thought of you as being lonely," Ron said conversationally. "Not with everyone always watching you. I mean, heroes don't get lonely, do they? Or if they do, you never hear about it." "It doesn't make for good stories," said Harry. "But I do get lonely. That time you stopped speaking to me in 4th year, half the time I was so lonely I wished I could die. The rest of the time I wish I could smash your face in. But you wouldn't want to hear about that." "I'll notice you don't deny it," said Ron. "Well, I called you a hero." "Well, if this is a dream," Harry said, "I guess I can say what I like in it." Ron leaned back against the seat. His hands were open on his knees. In reality, perhaps, they would have been full of chocolate frogs, exploding snap cards, or half a bag of sherbet lemons. Now they were empty. "It's because of Malfoy," he said. "Ironic that he turned out to be the one to teach you what you really are." Harry remembered Draco up on the tower saying, "This is a hero's choice. Your friends, or everything else." And he had not argued or denied it. "Ron," he said, "why are you here? Not that I'm not glad to see you. I mean, I miss you. But if I'm dreaming of you, there must be some reason. Especially since we're not really friends right now." "I don't know," Ron said. "Maybe you just want to talk to someone you once trusted." "I did trust you, and look what you did. You never trusted me, and you never trusted Hermione either. Not really. You shut her out, actually. Harry narrowed his eyes. So now you're my guilty conscience, he said. Look, I know I did the right thing. That doesn't mean I don't have doubts. Everyone questions the things they've done. But Hermione, she'll be fine without me. Ron shook his head. And Malfoy? Him too. Harry rubbed the back of his hand wearily across his eyes. I'm doing this for you, he said in a half-whisper. Ron smiled. It was a bright and cheeky smile, so familiar and so very much like Ron. So, you do remember, he said. Remember what? Harry asked. That you were my best friend first. Then he began to fade, the seat back becoming visible through his face and hair, and then it all began to dissolve. The compartment, the darkening sky, the window, Ron himself, like parchment burning up in a fire. There was a loud shrieking noise in Harry's ears, and as he blinked himself awake and struggled into a sitting position, he realized that it was the sounding charms announcing the train's arrival at King's Cross Station. He was finally in London. Nothing could have prepared Ginny for the trip to Dumbledore's office later that night. She had waited in the infirmary for hours, hoping that Harry would show up, but by 11 her eyes had begun to get sleepy. Giving Draco one last look, she stood up and began to walk towards the door when it opened, and Madame Pomfrey came in, looking harassed and worried in her padded robe and nightcap. Ginny opened her mouth to ask if anything was wrong, when Madame Pomfrey reached out a hand and grasped her fingers. She was startled. Madame Pomfrey never touched students, unless it was to administer medicine. Something was wrong. Miss Weasley, said the older woman in a furtive whisper, Dumbledore has asked that I please bring you to his office at once. Is everything all right? Ginny asked, now fairly alarmed. Is it about Draco? Madame Pomfrey pursed her lips. No, it isn't about Mr. Malfoy. She seemed to hesitate over her next sentence. It's about your brother. The next few minutes seemed to go by in a blur, as the two of them walked very quickly towards Dumbledore's office. The entire time Ginny's heart felt as if it were about to burst with anticipation. Did Dumbledore know something about Ron? Had he finally been found? And if he had been, what state was he in when they did? When they got there, Ginny went up alone, and was surprised to see Hermione sitting in one of the chairs opposite Dumbledore's desk. She was holding one of the golden candlesticks from the common room tightly in between her hands, and looked as if she had been crying. Dumbledore glanced up as she came in. Ah, Miss Weasley, he said, his voice very somber. I'm glad to see that Madame Pomfrey found you. Please, sit down. I'm afraid this conversation concerns you as well. Feeling somewhat disquieted, Ginny did as instructed and sat. Is something wrong, Professor? She asked, and chanced to glance at Hermione, who looked badly frightened. I'm afraid something quite unexpected has happened, and Miss Granger has just finished informing me of the rather unsavory details. Ginny felt her pulse begin to race, and as Dumbledore began to explain the events that had taken place in Gryffindor Tower earlier that night, she thought she might pass out from the recitation. It felt bizarre and unreal, as if she was dreaming. When he finished, Ginny stared at the headmaster. With all due respect, sir, she said, are you telling me that you know who has taken possession of my brother's body? It seems that way, Miss Weasley, yes. But why? I suspect that he would have done it because your brother is a diviner, and a mind like that can be made to do incredible feats, if trained properly. Ginny was on her feet in a moment. We need Harry, she said with finality. Next to her, Hermione raised her head in alarm. What for? She asked. Ginny looked at her in disbelief, as if she'd announced that she couldn't see why everyone was so bothered about Voldemort, as he seemed a nice enough fellow to her. Because of his world-famous recipe for raspberry trifle, she said. What do you think we need him for? He's got to know that the body of his best friend has been hijacked and is now being used as a puppet by you-know-who. A thought suddenly struck her, and she looked back at Dumbledore, horrified. He's not still in the castle, is he? Ron, I mean. I called up Peeves to make a thorough search of the area, and he reported back just before you came in that, no, your brother appears to have left. Dumbledore replied, looking more serious than Ginny had ever seen him look. I suspect that he didn't want to be found out just yet, as his new body will be quite valuable to him. He will not return tonight. Not now. He will know that Miss Granger has done the right thing and alerted me. Rest assured that once you two leave my office, I will be sending letters to the proper channels to make sure all will be on alert to find him. Now, he continued, and rose from his chair, I suggest you both try and get some rest, and we will inform Harry in the morning about all that has happened. Ginny opened her mouth to reply, but Hermione cut across her. Thank you, Professor, she said, in a voice that sounded like lead. We'll see you in the morning. And with that, she stood up, still clutching the candlestick to her chest, and began to walk out of the room. Ginny had no choice but to follow her. Once inside King's Cross, Harry debated briefly what to do with his baggage. He wasn't keen on hefting an enormous bag that held half his worldly possessions through Diagon Alley all day, especially once he realized that the words Gryffindor Seeker were still embroidered across the side of the bag in yellow thread. He'd have to do something about that. He remembered Draco telling him, You suck at incognito, Potter, and shrugged wryly to himself. He wound up storing his bag in a locker, which took the last of his Muggle money. He'd have to walk to the leaky cauldron, but he didn't mind much. The exercise would hopefully wake him up. Pulling a wrapper off a scrumdiddlyumptious bar, he nibbled it thoughtfully on his way to the station exit. Where he took the escalator past a bank of mirrors. It took him a moment to recognize himself, and then he stared. He looked so aggressively Muggle, it made him think of his past self. The Harry who lived with the Dursleys. The Harry who ached to belong somewhere. Anywhere other than where he was. Harry who had found the place where he belonged, and then left it in order to save it. More than anything else, he thought he looked young and defenseless. Without his robes, and without a wand in his hand, he looked like any teenage boy. He wished abruptly that Hermione was there, or Draco, or even Ron, because they would tell him that he was being stupid. It wasn't as if he'd wandered arbitrarily into the business of world saving. He'd been born to it, bred to it, was uniquely marked for it. Blood, inheritance, and choices had made him what he was. Every choice he had ever made brought him to this place, and to the points beyond it. As he reached the top of the escalator, He tossed the rest of his half-eaten chocolate bar into the nearest bin, then began his solitary walk through the darkness of the Muggle streets. "It smells like mud," said Draco, looking glumly down at the glass of murky fluid Madame Pomfrey had set on his bedside table. The morning sunlight poured through the half-open window like a benediction, and laid a sheer gilded varnish over his bright hair and light eyes, and even made the glass on the table sparkle. Although anything would have looked good to Ginny on this particular morning. She scrubbed the back of her hand across her eyes. "That's too bad. Drink it," she said in a weary tone, having not slept much the previous night. Draco took up the glass and sighed. "I suppose it would be a bit much to hope for an antidote that tastes like a 1982 Chateau Haut-Brion." "You are so spoiled," said Ginny succinctly. "Just drink your antidote, Draco." "But it looks bad," he said in a small, pitiful voice, hunching his shoulders inside his pajamas. "You haven't even tried it." "It smells funny." Ginny got to her feet. "Draco Malfoy," she said in a dangerously quiet voice, "I was in Dumbledore's office at 11 last night, and then couldn't get to sleep until 7. I am extremely tired and irritable, and if you do not take your antidote right now, I will sneak up behind you with a razor blade and shave off all your hair." She finished on a gasp and crossed her arms furiously across her chest. To her great annoyance, Draco was laughing at her. "You're cute when you're hacked off. Flirt with me, Malfoy, and I'll pour a bottle of Skelligro on your head. Let's see how cute you think you are when your head grows larger than a quaffle." "There are many who would say my head is swollen already," Draco pointed out, lifting the glass to his mouth and draining it in one swallow. Then he dropped the glass with a shudder and pressed his hands to his stomach. "Ugh," he groaned. Ginny leaned forward to retrieve the glass and gave his hair a sympathetic pat as she did so. It was so fine and silky, it clung to her fingers. She drew her hand back and stared at him. Was it really that awful? He straightened up, wincing. His mouth was drawn as in pain, but his voice was light when he replied, "Tasted a bit like cinnamon and sugar. If you took cinnamon and sugar and sprinkled them on an old shoe, then dumped a vat of boba pus on it. How often do I have to take this stuff?" "According to Snape, 3 times a day." Draco moaned and sprawled tragically backward onto the pillows. "It burns," he said fretfully, and looked at her wide-eyed. "I've a very low pain threshold, really. Hardly a threshold at all. More like a small but tastefully decorated foyer." Ginny, knowing this to be patently untrue, made a face at him. "If it makes you feel better to writhe about and complain, then writhe about and complain. But if I catch you not taking your antidote, I'll kill you." Draco rolled over onto his stomach and grinned up at her disarmingly. "So," he said after a moment's hesitation, "why were you in Dumbledore's office last night? Get caught practicing that pole dancing you were talking about yesterday? I notice Hermione isn't here yet. Did she get caught dancing with you? Tell me. I must know every sordid detail." In answer to his questions, Ginny merely looked uncomfortable. Draco furrowed his brow. "Ginny," he said, "what's wrong?" Ginny hesitated. How to explain what she didn't even understand herself? She opened her mouth to reply, but a voice from behind her froze her speech. "Did you see him take the antidote?" said Snape, appearing suddenly and almost noiselessly at the foot of the bed. "Yes," said Ginny, wondering momentarily at the bizarreness of a situation which found her allied with Snape. He complained a lot, but he took it. "Sit up, Mr. Malfoy," said Snape. "Let me look at you." Looking mildly surprised, Draco sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. Ginny looked closely at him. Did he look any better? She was forced to admit to herself that she could see no real difference, except perhaps a bit more color in his cheeks. But that could be a number of things. Snape peered down at Draco, as if he were staring at something bubbling inside a cauldron. Then he folded his arms, apparently satisfied. "There will be side effects," he announced. "I don't suppose those include fortuitous ability to conduct a light opera in French?" Draco asked, somewhat wistfully. "No," said Snape flatly, and Ginny wondered why Draco bothered. The potions master had less of a sense of humor than Voldemort, but the thought made her wince inwardly, and she turned away from them for a moment. "You must be cautious, Mr. Malfoy. While I would encourage you to take part in physical activity, you must be very careful with your physical strength. Please keep your performance of magic to a minimum. This antidote will interfere with your abilities, especially your magic gifts. I would prefer if you avoided wandless magic entirely. Your telepathy—" At that, Draco's head snapped up. "Speaking of which, I couldn't reach Harry this morning," he said. "I was trying—" "Well, stop trying," said Snape. But something flickered behind his eyes, and Ginny stared at the older man, feeling a sudden twinge of panic. "I see no reason for you to waste your energy attempting to contact Potter, who is doubtless still asleep in his dormitory. You should concentrate on conserving your energy." "Thank you, Professor," said Draco. "I appreciate it." "And go outside," said Snape. "It is a very pleasant morning." And then he left in a swirl of dark robes. Both Ginny and Draco stared after him, both never having heard Snape use the word pleasant before. Draco got to his feet. "Pull the curtain shut, will you?" he requested, shrugging off his pajama top. "Oh!" Ginny said, and stepped outside the curtains, hastily tugging them shut behind her, although not before the image of Draco, shirtless, unknotting the tie at the waistband of his pajama bottoms, branded itself against the backs of her eyes. Draco emerged from behind the curtains, tugging a long-sleeved jumper down over charcoal trousers. "I need my hairbrush," he muttered. "I can't find it." "We're going to wake up Harry, aren't we? You can borrow his." "Potter owns a hairbrush?" Ginny stuck her tongue out at him. "Do you want to tell Harry about the antidote, or should I?" "Maybe you should," Draco said, and shook his head, faint concern wavering behind his eyes. "I haven't been able to find him since I woke up. I guess he's deeply asleep. I thought I remembered him being here last night, though. Did you see him?" Ginny shook her head. "No." "Maybe I dreamt it." Draco shrugged. "Anyway, yeah, I guess he'd want to know. So we should tell him." He smiled then, one that flickered fast across his face. Later, Ginny would remember that smile, and wonder if she would ever see him smile like that again. "Come on, Malfoy," she said. "Let's go." "All right," he said. "Back to my earlier question. Why were you in Dumbledore's office last night?" Ginny looked at him nervously, and he looked back at her, obviously waiting. Knowing that she would have to tell him sooner or later, she took a deep breath and began to explain what had happened the night before. Draco slowed his pace as they walked, the obvious shock he felt seeming to slow his movements to a near grinding halt. There was frost on the window pane, and the sun threw oddly shaped shadows against his pale skin, like feathery scars. Finally, when she finished speaking, he turned to her and said, "So, you know who has found himself another body, and your brother got to be the grand prize." "Don't," Ginny said miserably. Her eyes were dark, unhappy, and there were bruised blue shadows under them. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have said that. At least Dumbledore knows, and will do everything he can to make sure that others are on the lookout." Ginny said nothing, but the tense lines around her mouth deepened. "Although," he added, seeming unable to help it, "I think my father once told me that in most cases of possession, once the possessing spirit is destroyed, the victim reverts to normal, with no recollection of what occurred." "What about the other cases?" she asked. His eyes, as he met hers, were apologetic. "Sometimes they remember everything," he said. Ginny flinched at this. "But we don't know how dangerous he really is," she said, "although he did threaten to kill Hermione last night." Draco nodded. "But you also said he ran away the instant his cover was blown. Or maybe Weasley managed to reassert himself, was completely horrified, and bolted." He shrugged. "I know it sounds stupid, but the point is, we don't know." Ginny sighed. "Then our first order of business is to find Harry and Hermione," she said. "When Harry knows about what happened to Ron, maybe he'll know what we should do." They had reached the portrait of the fat lady, and Ginny gave the password, and she and Draco ducked through. Inside the common room was eerily silent, and the uneasiness that Ginny had felt when Snape had told Draco not to speak with Harry telepathically was back once more. The sense that something equally terrible as her brother being possessed felt as if it had already happened, or was about to happen, and made the room seem suddenly stifling, as if all the air had been sucked out. She half closed her eyes as they mounted the stairs to the boys' dormitory. "Harry," she thought suddenly, "please let nothing have happened to him, please." At the end of the empty corridor, Draco opened the door to the dormitory, and it took their eyes a moment to adjust to the dimness inside the room. The first thing Ginny saw, when the darkness cleared, was Hermione sitting on Harry's bed. She had something in her hand, and it took her a moment to realize that it was a piece of parchment. She stepped forward slowly, Draco beside her, her heartbeat picking up once more. If something had happened to Harry, there was no way Hermione would be here like this, calmly reading a bit of parchment. Still, something about her posture, the tenseness in her shoulders, the arms rigid at her sides, forbade approach. "Hermione?" Draco whispered. It was so soft, but Ginny gave a little start regardless. "What's happened? What's that you're reading?" She raised her head and looked at them. Under the torches, Hermione's wild hair looked black rather than brown, and her eyes were dark pools of misery. She held the parchment out to them and said in a steady voice, "It's a letter from Harry," she said. "Only I don't think he wrote it." The goblin behind the desk squinted his eyes at him suspiciously.
"And you're quite sure you're Sirius Black?"
"Yes," said Harry firmly. "I hold the rights to Vault 687 along with my godson, Harry Potter. Here's my key and my paperwork. You can see it's all in order." The goblin raised one arched eyebrow, but indeed, everything was in order. Harry had the large gold key to the vault, and the paperwork Sirius had sent to him at the beginning of term. Harry was, briefly, thankful that the wizarding world did not rely on things like photographic identification, and even more thankful that goblins both had poor eyesight and took little interest in the affairs of wizards.
Indeed. And I might say, Mr. Black, that you're looking fantastic for your age,
said the goblin, lifting the key in its long, clever fingers.
Really fantastic. One would hardly recognize you from your wanted posters.
Well, said Harry weakly, I moisturize daily. It does wonders for the complexion. The goblin shrugged, losing interest.
Very well. I'll have someone take you down to your vault. Unless there's something else I can do for you.
No, said Harry hastily. 2 smaller goblins in red and gold suits were summoned to lead Harry down to the vaults, and he allowed himself to be led. The goblin behind the counter watched bemusedly as the thin boy with the bright green eyes and the untidy black hair disappeared through the double doors at the end of the hall.
Harry Potter breaking into his own vault,
he thought to himself, with a mixture of disapprobation and amusement.
Wizards certainly are a peculiar breed. Very peculiar indeed.
Ginny blinked at Hermione, clearly dumbfounded. What do you mean Harry wouldn't write that letter? Because he wouldn't write this. He couldn't possibly have. Here, read it, Hermione said, and there was something odd in her voice, a slightly childish tone that she'd rarely heard her use before. You'll see what I mean. Ginny took the parchment from her, and together she and Draco sat down on the bed to read it closer to the light. The handwriting leapt out at her first. It was absolutely Harry's, from the crooked T's to the inexpertly dotted I's, the handwriting of a boy who'd grown up writing in the dark, late at night. And as she scanned rapidly down the page, she felt her mouth dry up and her heart quicken again. She read it over once more, just to be sure, but the words on the page still said the same thing. She finished the letter, feeling stunned, almost breathless with shock. She tore her eyes from the page and stared at Draco. He had obviously finished the letter before she had, and was looking wide-eyed at the wall opposite. There was such unguarded defenselessness in his expression that it took her entirely by surprise. You see what I mean? Hermione said from the other side of the bed. He couldn't have written that. He wouldn't say those things. Is that all there was? Ginny said, as calmly as she could. Something flickered behind Hermione's eyes, and she briefly looked at Draco. No, she said finally. That was this too. And she took up something that had been lying beside her on the coverlet and held it out to Ginny. The gold chain glittered like liquid fire under the torchlight, and she could see the faint marks in the band of the charm where Lucius had once scored it with his nails. It was with the letter, Hermione said bleakly. Great Merlin! Ginny heard the breathlessness in her own voice as she reached out and took the charm from Hermione. I can't believe he'd leave this behind, but then he said he didn't want to be followed. Draco spoke up then. His words clipped as he did so. Someone must have forced him to write it. He was staring at the epistolical charm as if it were a dangerous animal that might suddenly leap out and bite him. Then they forced him to take the charm off. And did what with Harry? Hermione asked. Killed him? Draco shot her a look of accusatory fury. Don't even joke about that. I'm not joking. Her voice was even. But I know Harry, and to get that charm away from him, you'd have to kill him. Unless he was willing to take it off voluntarily, it wouldn't come off. It's charmed that way. You know that, Draco. He stood up suddenly and paced away from the bed. His hands were clenching and unclenching into fists at his side, as if he didn't know quite what to do with them. You don't understand. Yesterday, when we were talking, he promised. I know what he promised. It says it in the letter. Draco. She yearned to reach out and touch him, but held herself back. People break promises. Even Harry breaks promises. If he thought it was for your own good somehow. But that's not what the letter says, does it? Hermione looked at the piece of parchment clutched in Ginny's hands. For a moment, she wondered whether to point out the fact that Harry apparently hadn't left her any kind of message at all. But she doubted Draco would be very much moved by that. Better no letter than one like this. Some part of her mind rebelled against the idea that Harry had written something so carelessly cruel. It's a horrible letter, said Ginny quietly. I don't want to think Harry wrote it either, but the alternatives are worse. Either he wrote this and went off voluntarily, or he didn't write this, and something awful has happened to him. I'd rather think he did this than he's dead. He's not dead. Draco's voice was a keen edge of an icicle. I'd know if he was. Can you? Hermione asked, her voice very soft. Can you reach him at all? Draco shook his head. His mouth was a thin, tense line. No. Snape told me not to. And anyway, he's blocking me. But I can feel him. I know he's alive. Is he blocking you on purpose? Draco nodded grudgingly. Yes. Well then, Hermione said, then trailed off, and for a moment there was silence. She could feel Draco standing near her, vibrating with tension like a strung wire. She reached into her pocket and drew her wand out and touched the edge of the letter, half whispering the words of the spell, which she'd used before. Ink and parchment, quill and bone, let this letter's truth be shown. Quill and inkpot, seal and feather, reveal the writer of this letter. The parchment trembled. Then the words on the page rearranged themselves to form a single name. Harry James Potter. Hermione jerked her head up and looked at Draco. She was close enough to him that she saw his color go, like flame blown out in a lamp. But other than that, he was expressionless. Draco, it's better than if something has happened to him, she said in a half-whisper. I know. He spoke stiffly. I guess I hadn't thought about it that way. You're right, of course. He pushed a lock of bright hair out of eyes that looked as if someone had just died. You're always right. Ginny put the letter down, then stood up, reaching her hand out to him. He had turned his face away from her, and she could not read his expression. She could see the rapid pulse beating at the base of his throat, where his shirt fell away from the fragile collarbone. There were words she wanted to say, words she would have said to any of her brothers if it had been some similar situation, but they dried up in her throat. She couldn't imagine them as applied to Draco Malfoy, who didn't lie, didn't dance, didn't faint, didn't cry, and didn't ever show that he felt anything at all. Not even now. I think maybe he wanted you to be angry at him, Ginny said, so you wouldn't miss him when he was gone. No, Draco's voice was flat. He reached out and took the charm from her hand and closed his fingers around it. He doesn't think like that, or tell those kind of lies, he said. He knows me well enough to know that it wouldn't be a favor to me to let me die hating him. You're not going to die. Hermione exploded suddenly and stood up. Don't say that. And you could never hate Harry. It isn't in you. Oh, save me from you bloody Gryffindors, said Draco, and there was a terrible humorlessness in his voice. Then he shook his head, his hair flying around him like colorless starlight. Don't tell me what I'm capable of, he said, his voice calmer now, or what bloody good reason Potter might have had for what he's done. Tell yourself whatever pretty stories you want, but leave me out of it. Understand? Hermione felt a prickle of despair in her heart, and she did understand, despite herself. Draco came from a line of high-born wizards who would rather throw themselves on the point of a sword than wait for the slow transfixion. And as much as he had defied his father, he was still a Malfoy, through and through. He was backing away from both of them now, almost knocking into the small table by Seamus's bed, and they both stiffened with surprise. For her part, Ginny could not have remembered having ever seen Draco walk into anything before. I should go, he said. Where? Ginny asked, trying to keep the frantic note out of her voice. He paused, his back against the door, feeling behind himself for the knob. Don't worry about it, he said, and pushed the door open and went out, closing it behind him. Hermione sank back onto the bed, hearing his footsteps recede down the corridor outside. After a moment, Ginny sat down next to her. Harry ducked and swore under his breath as a copy of Who's Who in the Wizarding World tumbled down from an upper bookshelf, almost making a dent in his head. He grabbed at the ladder he was standing on to steady himself and leaned back, looking up at the innumerable shelves disappearing into the air above him. He had never been in this section of Flourish and Blotts, and in fact the clerk behind the front counter had looked at him oddly when he'd come into the shop and asked for the travel section, although perhaps he was just trying to place the slight boy with tangled black hair and no glasses, who ducked away from the light as if he were shy of it. You look a bit like Harry Potter, the clerk said, directing Harry towards the back of the store. People always say that, Harry had replied, pulling his cloak closer around himself. I don't see it myself. Now his gaze slid over the travel book titles. Let's Flew Europe, 1997. The Lonely Broomstick's Guide to Eastern Europe. A Wizard's Guide to Muggle Europe. Culture Shock, The Carpathians. And The Wizarding Rough Guides. He reached out a hand and pulled a few of the more helpful-looking volumes off the shelf. Jumping down from the ladder, he made a beeline for an overstuffed chair in one of the more hidden corners of the shop, and sank down into it, expelling a small sigh of relief. It had been hours since he'd sat down, and his sleep on the train had not been exactly restful. The books turned out to be something of a disappointment. They failed to contain any information on how to get from one place to another without apparating, which was what Harry really wanted to know, and instead were full of what wizards no doubt considered helpful tips on how to get along in the Muggle world. Harry read them with increasing disbelief and a sense of incredulous amusement. According to Let's Flew, Muggle trains, unlike their wizarding equivalent, are unequipped with sounding charms, which alert the passenger when the train draws near the station. Therefore, the traveller must remain vigilant. You may wish to stick your head out the window and keep an eye on the surrounding countryside to ensure that you do not miss your stop. The farther you stick your head out, the better view you will have." Harry choked on a muffled laugh and looked up and around. He couldn't remember the last time he'd read something so ridiculous, and could only imagine what Hermione would have to say about it. Harry sobered quickly, subsiding back into his chair. He'd forgotten for a moment that Hermione wasn't there. He tried to return to reading, but the words washed together on the page. The sudden recollection of Hermione's absence had been a physical sort of shock, as if someone had walked up and, without warning, slid a very cold, very thin dagger sharply home between two of his ribs. He could only imagine how much worse it was going to get as the days and weeks wore on and on. He remembered being told about amputees who still felt pain in the limbs they'd lost long ago. The mind's map recalling those places which had been burned or cut away. He thought about reaching out to Draco just once, unblocking his own mind and looking for his friends. He knew he could do it at this distance. It would be difficult, but possible. But deep down, he knew that unblocking his mind to Draco's was not a good idea. Draco would break his resolve down in 2 seconds flat. No, it was better to do what he had been doing and keep the contact closed. In the end, this decision would keep them alive, and that was what mattered, wasn't it? Harry got to his feet, slowly, looking at the pile of books on the armchair. Finally, he selected The Lonely Broomstick's Guide to the Continent, almost at random, and dragged himself over to the front counter to pay. Exhaustion hung over him like a second cloak. He was so tired, he stepped on a round-faced witch's outstretched foot, and nearly knocked over a hooded wizard carrying an enormous pile of divination books. Flustered from apologizing, Harry was halfway through paying the clerk behind the counter when a thought occurred to him. "Excuse me," he began, "but I was wondering if there's a way out of Diagon Alley that won't take me back through the leaky cauldron." The clerk looked up at him sharply, and once again Harry had the feeling that the man was trying to place him. "What's wrong with the leaky cauldron, lad?" said Harry, swallowing hard. "I'm trying to avoid an old girlfriend. You know how these things are." "Ah, yes." The clerk wrinkled his narrow face in thought. "I don't know that there's a better way." "There is another way," said the hooded wizard with the divination books, who had been silently standing behind Harry in line. "Through the percolating teacup. It's a pub. 2 streets down from Margin Alley, you take a left and keep walking. You can't miss it." "Ah," said Harry. He would have thanked the stranger, but there was something in his aspect, in the cloak drawn close about his face, and the withdrawn posture, that advised against it. "Well," said Harry, "I'll be getting along then." He took his purchase and escaped out into the street, then set off towards Margin Alley with a determined stride. Back in the bookshop, the wizard who had directed Harry to the percolating teacup pushed his stack of books across the counter towards the clerk, his hood slipping back slightly as he did so, revealing his bright red hair. "Doing a bit of delving into divination, lad?" the clerk observed, with a pleased smile, and glanced down at the stack of books with a chuckle. "The Rising of the Moon and Stars, The Darkness, A History of Crystal Ball Reading, I Was a Teenage Seer, The Autobiography of Professor Trelawney, A Trial of Tea Leaves, Inside the Visions Inside Us, and Empaths Who Admit Their Barking." However, he added, brushing his wand across the book covers and adding up the prices that appeared, glowing in mid-air, wouldn't your parents be none too pleased that you were hanging about in a place like the Percolating Teacup? Oh, I wouldn't go there, said Ronald Weasley, his blue eyes lit with amusement. I was just having a bit of fun with the tourist. I mean, honestly, do I look like someone who was likely to cause any trouble on purpose? The clerk chuckled. Not at all. In the ancient days of the wizarding world, and even now among the upper classes and more traditional families, one could often tell the content of a letter by the color of the bird chosen to deliver it. A white bird meant a message of peace or friendship. Red was for love, black for vengeance. Blue meant victory, and gray meant death or defeat. The bird that swooped in the window of the castle that afternoon was a brown barn owl, its throat ringed with a collar of metal. It was pleased to find the inside of the castle warm, and rode the gentle currents of air with slight motions of its wings, sailing down corridors and up staircases, until it found the small room with the boy it was looking for inside it. He sat against the wall with his legs drawn up, his pale blonde head on his knees, his slender arms wrapped around himself, and silvery light pooled around him on the floor. The owl landed by Draco Malfoy's left foot and hooted softly. Very slowly, Draco raised his head and looked at the bird. He wondered vaguely at the fact that it had managed to find him at all. But then, this was one of his father's owls, bred to his own blood, the best owls money could buy. What he had been holding in his hand dropped to the ground with a metallic clang, and he reached to take the letter strapped to the bird's leg. His hand hurt badly, and it took several tries before he was able to unfasten the letter and open it. He stretched his legs out along the stone floor, ignoring the shrieks of protest from his cramped joints, and spread out the letter on his lap and began to read it. Draco, he has left you, as I expected he would. I told you once you were wasting your time in bartering your destiny for a friendship of a boy who would never trust you. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised, as you never knew when enough was enough. That aside, I am not writing to merely upbraid you. Severus will not be able to find the antidote he seeks. I can tell you that with utter honesty. Your only hope for survival, indeed for salvation, rests with me. I am your father. I gave you life once, and am prepared to do it again. The Dark Lord has vowed to me that he will see it done, and indeed it can be done. In exchange for my aid to you, I expect a token of your unswerving loyalty to me. If you agree, send back to me the sealed ring I gave you, the mark of our family. By that token, I will know that you have come to your senses, regained your familial pride, and are prepared to once again stand on our side. Consider quickly, Draco. The time you have for this decision is not much. It should be an easy choice. When we last spoke, it appeared to me that you thought you had discovered something worth dying for. Can you still say the same now? Your father, Lucius Malfoy. Draco looked down at the letter for several long moments. Then he turned it over, summoned a quill, and wrote across the back of the parchment in what looked like silvery ink, but was not. Dear Father, you have proven that you can make me die, but that's all you can make me do. Draco. The physical act of writing hurt too much for him to want to write anything lengthier. Besides, Draco felt he had little more to say on the subject. He would hear back from his father on this topic, he was quite sure. This letter had been the opening salvo in what promised to be a most unpleasant exchange. Not that Draco cared. In comparison to the other letter he had received that day, this missive from his father seemed as gentle as a pat on the head. He strapped the letter to the owl's leg and watched it fly out the open window and into the late afternoon sky beyond. Later, Harry would remember that first sight of the interior of the percolating teacup. He marveled bitterly at what a fool he had been. But when he first stepped through the doors, all freezing bare hands and chattering teeth, he was conscious only that it was warm inside, and that the blood in his veins was half frozen. The interior of the pub, if that was what it was, bore some resemblance to the leaky cauldron, but not much. It was dark, illuminated mainly by the glow of a fire in an enormous stone grate along the far wall. But where the leaky cauldron was shabby, this place was all polished brass railings, plush, dark green sofas and armchairs, and a gleaming bar. It was full of wizards, sunk into the heavy armchairs, puffing on pipes. They were heavily robed and cowled against the chill air that soaked through the leaded glass window. The bar itself was staffed by a dour-looking man in tailored dark robes, and Harry noted the absence of any witches. He ordered a butterbeer and went to stand by the fire. He had wanted to ask about the back way out, but some part of him rebelled passionately against the idea of heading out into that rain. Instead, he set his drink on the mantel and leaned into the fire. He didn't dare push the hood of his robe back, since the clerk in the bookshop had tried to place him. He'd felt strangely naked and identifiable. He reached out his hands closer to the fire. They were wet and pale, almost blue at the tips. He had been stupid to have left his gloves in his bag at the station. Pale gold sparks flew from a log, illuminating the bright sequins of brass affixed to the brick fireplace facade at regular intervals. Harry leaned a bit closer to look at the bronze plaque, and saw that each one bore a name. Evan Rosier, Antonin Dolohov, Augustin Malclebert, Bella Travers, Augustus Rookwood, Sebastian and Mary Lestrange, Peter Pettigrew, Bartholomew Crouch Jr., Lucius Malfoy. Harry stared for a moment in blank incomprehension. Then his heart gave an almighty lurch and slammed against his ribcage with the force of a rogue bludger. Swiftly, he straightened up and looked around him carefully. Nobody seemed to be looking at him, thankfully. Yet everything in the room had taken on a sinister cast now. The men in their dark robes by the chess table, the sour-faced bartender, the shadows pooling in the corners of the room. The brass rods that held the heavy black curtains in place over the windows were carved in the shape of curling serpents. He took a deep breath, trying to slow his racing pulse. This was a Death Eater meeting place. He had not been looking at the street names as he had been walking. Perhaps he had turned onto Nocturne Alley without meaning to. It hardly mattered now. What mattered was that he was here, and that he had to get out. Harry pulled his damp cloak about himself and stepped away from the fire. Staring down at his feet, he began to walk across the room. It wasn't far to the door, no more than 30 paces. "Harry!" a voice called out to him cheerfully. "Harry Potter! What on earth are you doing here? Harry jerked his head up, heart pounding in his chest. Ron stood directly in front of him. He wore a heavy cloak, and the hood was thrown back, showing his bright red hair, starred all over with drops of rain, as if it had been sprinkled with seed pearls. Harry was momentarily rattled. Ron? Where did you come from? Ron looked at him blankly. What do you mean? I saw you come in, he said. I followed you. There was something wrong with this assertion. Harry recognized it even through the turmoil in his mind. How did you see me? I had my hood up. Your watch? Ron pointed at Harry's wrist. The one Hermione gave you. Ron, Harry hissed and grabbed the other boy's arm. Stop being stupid. We have to get out of here. But why? Ron's voice was lazy, curious. He reached up then, without warning, and batted at the hood of Harry's cloak. It fell back, and Harry was bareheaded in the glare of the firelight. All around him, Harry could hear rustling. The Death Eaters were standing up, setting down the glasses they had been holding. His stomach twisted in panic, and he let go of Ron's arm and stumbled back. 12 Death Eaters were advancing on them now, slow, unhurried. They moved as smoothly as Dementors. Harry reached to jerk his right sleeve up. The runic band on his belt was freezing cold against his bare wrist. So cold, it burned. He flung his hand out, fingers splayed. Incendious! For a moment, it felt as if all Harry's pent-up anguish and fury was pouring down through his veins, into his hand and through his fingers. Light flared, and a bank of fire sprang up just behind Ron, blocking the Death Eaters from view. Harry lowered his hand and held it out to Ron. Ron, he said, come on! But the other boy shook his head, his eyes gone suddenly dark. In fact, they were a much darker blue than Harry remembered them. But there was barely time to notice that detail. The Death Eaters had begun pushing their way through the wall of flame, which was already beginning to die down. Come on! Groaned Harry, in an agony of haste. But Ron, bizarrely, grinned. I don't think so, Harry. He crossed his arms over his chest. Let's see if you can run as fast as you can fly. Harry gaped, but there was no time. With a last shocked look at his best friend, Harry spun around and fled through the door and into the rain-soaked alley beyond. The heavy iron door of the potions dungeon slammed closed behind Hermione as she strode into the center of the room. Snape, at work over his cauldrons, turned and looked at her with an expression of grim inquiry. His eyes, under the overgrown black brows, were sharply hooded. Give me something to do, she said. He turned entirely towards her, looping his thin hands into the sleeves of his dark robes. I do not require your assistance, he said. Hermione looked at him and thought about how much she had hated this man once, the cruel things he had said to her, his viciousness towards Harry. That Dumbledore allowed this behavior had always made her question the headmaster's judgment, although Harry had maintained that Dumbledore did it to prove the point that evil existed in the universe, however mysteriously permanent, and that one day they would all have to learn to cope with it. She was not sure she had ever learned to cope with it, but somewhere along the line she had stopped hating Snape. For the past few days she had not even minded working alongside him. Of course, she would have thrown in her lot with the devil himself if it would have gotten an antidote for Draco. But working with Snape had been surprisingly painless. He was, if nothing else, brilliant at his craft, and Hermione respected that. He also seemed to care about Draco. Well, they had that in common. She had never had anything in common with Snape before. "Please," she said, after the silence had stretched on too long. "I need something useful to do, or—" Her voice trailed off. "Or what, Miss Granger?" "Or I'll go mad," she said. "I mean it. And I know you don't care." Snape slowly removed his thin white hands from the sleeves of his robe. "Potter is gone, then?" he said. Hermione checked herself. "Yes. How did you know?" Snape stood still for a moment. "I suggested it to him," he said finally, "but I did not know he had taken my advice. Does Mr. Malfoy know?" "Yes," Hermione said, her shock at the admission momentarily rattling her. Then the thoughts of the letter reared up like a poisonous snake in her mind. "Did you also suggest to Harry that he ought to write a cruel missive before he left, so that Draco wouldn't follow him?" "Certainly not." Snape's tone was brisk, as if I would insert myself in Potter's sentimental drivel. "It wasn't sentimental. It was horrible." Snape shrugged once more, briefly. "That is as may be," he said. "What is significant is that he is gone." "But Draco—" "Has greater worries than Potter's whereabouts. He has his antidote to take. His health should be of primary concern. I assure you his distress will be temporary," said Snape, still in the same brisk tone. "Temporary?" Hermione said, so fiercely that her chest hurt. "How can you assume how Draco will feel? Why do you care? Why do you meddle in a friendship that had nothing to do with you?" She spat the questions out at the potions master before she could stop them. There was a cool silence before Snape replied. "They have learned to depend upon each other, and that connection will become dangerous over time, unless they are put in a position where neither is willing or able to reach out for the other. If one dies, so might the other." "You can't be certain of that," she opined, but a great deal of fervor had gone from her voice. "Believe what you like, but ask yourself this. Are you willing to take the risk that I'm wrong?" Hermione swept Snape with a scornful gaze. "I hate this," she said. "I hate all of it. And you, and Dumbledore. You know I've always wondered if you were behind more of this than you've ever admitted to. That polyjuice potion is— "This what you meant by needing something to do, Miss Granger?" Snape interrupted in a low, serpentine voice. "I had thought perhaps that you wished to learn how Draco's antidote is made. But perhaps you would prefer to simply fling accusations at me. You may continue to do so if you wish, but do not expect me to pay attention. I have work that requires doing." Hermione blinked at him. She had registered little beyond his offer regarding Draco's antidote. "You'd teach me how it was made?" "There might come a time when you might need to make it, and I might not be there, and Draco will be too ill to handle the process," he said. "No, of course. I mean, I want to know how to make it. I very much want to know." "Then you should know that the side effects of taking this antidote are not pleasant." The black eyes under the hooded lids held a latent somberness that was disconcerting. "It is constructed to burn the poison out of his blood, but as the poison's concentration in his blood increases, the taking of the antidote will be more painful." "I'll make him take it," she said, her voice grim. "You may have to hold him down," said Snape. "I'll make him take it," she repeated, hardly recognizing her own voice, the flat determination in it. "He needs it." "People hate what they need," said Snape coolly. Hermione raised her chin and looked at him. "I don't care if he hates me for making him take it," she said. "I care if he lives." Snape nodded, apparently satisfied. Then he walked around the table and picked up a vial of blackish fluid. "Extract of nightshade," he began, "must be added to the powdered belladonna first, in that order, for the combination to be effective. The subsequent addition of the asphodel is a delicate procedure." Harry ran. He had left the percolating teacup far behind him, but the Death Eaters poured out of the doors after him, a swift army of black-clad ants, hot on his heels. They knew the area much better than he did. They would find him, and they would back him into a corner. He hoped that when they did, he'd be able to kill at least a few of them before they tried to take him. He shook the thought out of his mind. If he could find his way back to Diagon Alley, he'd have a chance. But the narrow alleys had turned into an unrecognizable warren of twisting, labyrinthine tunnels between stone buildings. The streets were slick with frozen rain, and the mist covered everything like a blinding cloud. So Harry ran. His booted feet found skidding purchase on the icy ground, and for the first time he blessed his scrawniness, his wiry lightness and delicate build. It was what made him such a good seeker, and now it allowed him to race over the ground as swiftly as an arrow flying through the air. His heart pounded in his ears, and the blood sang in his veins, and he felt a sort of savage satisfaction as he reached a low fence and scrambled up and over it, dropping lightly to the other side. The rain sizzled against his flushed cheeks as he ran, caught in the tangles of his soaking hair, dripped down the round collar of his cloak. His feet, inside the dragonhide boots, were dry, but his trousers were almost soaked through. He thought he could hear the Death Eaters behind him, the pounding of feet on the pavement, but perhaps that was just his imagination. Putting on a burst of speed, he reached the end of a long alleyway and whipped around the corner. 2 narrower alleys branched off in opposite directions here. Harry blinked, then flung himself blindly to the left, but felt himself growing tired, his breath rasping in his chest. The alley turned a sharp corner. Harry spun around it at top speed, only to find that it dead-ended at the side of a building. He skidded to a stop and looked around himself despairingly. Wet black walls covered in ancient posters advertising now defunct charms and potions rose all around him. There was a bolted door in the side of the wall furthest from him. He wiped rain out of his eyes and jogged forward quickly. It was a moment before he realized there was someone there, someone leaning against the wall by the door. At first, just a dark silhouette, and then there was a spark of light. It flared to a greater glow, and the faint illumination wove 1,000 silver strands out of the frozen rain. He saw a slender figure in a long dark cloak, a bent fair head, a face hidden by a raised hand, a peeling poster behind the figure advertising Finian's Finishing Potion, now in brand new cherry flavor. Harry felt the sharp pressure of shock behind his eyes. even before the figure lowered its hand and raised its head and looked at him and smiled. He raised his hand. There was something glowing in it, like a spark of witchlight or marsh fire. "About time you got here," Draco said. Harry's jaw dropped open and stayed open. "Malfoy? How did you know? How did you find me?" Draco took a step away from the wall and began walking towards him, slowly, as if there was no hurry in the world. "Are you really that surprised?" Harry stared at the face he hadn't really expected to see again. "No." Harry's voice was a half-whisper. "But I did everything to prevent this." "You're not glad to see me?" The narrow mouth curled up at the corner, like paper curling as it burned. "How astonishing." "Malfoy," Harry began, still in too much shock to form a proper sentence. "There are Death Eaters chasing me." Unexpectedly, Draco threw back his head and laughed. "Death Eaters chasing you? You are funny. I love it. What's next? Going to start up with that whole 'I'm a pitiful orphan, take care of me because I have to save the world' thing? Merlin's beard, but you are boring sometimes." Harry looked at him, dumbfounded. "I'm serious, Malfoy. There are Death Eaters chasing me. Your father will probably—" Draco shook the wet hair out of his eyes. "Oh, right. My father. How could I forget my father? Such a bastard." His voice was toneless, cool, amused. "Malfoy, what—" Harry broke off, feeling even more stunned. Then he reached out tentatively with his mind, but it was like hitting his hand against a concrete wall. Draco was close enough to him now that Harry could see the familiar silver scar under his eye. "Really, Potter?" Draco's voice was the same cool drawl Harry remembered from years gone by. He took a step forward, closing the slight gap between them, and pushed Harry hard against the wall. Harry felt cold, wet stone through the material of his cloak. Draco held him pinned there, his hand against Harry's chest, and with his other hand he reached into Harry's pocket and drew out his glasses. "I was wondering where these were." He flipped the glasses open and slid them onto Harry's face. "There, that's better," he said. Wordless, Harry looked at him. "Malfoy, what the hell do you think you're—" he began. "Shut up," interrupted Draco pleasantly, his grip tightening on Harry's shirt. For a dizzying moment, Harry was positive Draco was going to hit him, and his muscles tensed up hard. Draco grinned. "Scared, Potter?" he said, and then he did the last thing Harry would have ever expected, and leaned across the small space that separated them, and kissed Harry on the mouth. Ginny headed down the stairs to Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. It wasn't exactly the place she would have chosen to wash her face, but she didn't feel like being in the common room anymore. It felt so depressing after what had happened with the letter. The door of the bathroom creaked as she opened it, and she could hear the faint sniffles of Moaning Myrtle as she came in and smelled the familiar smell of soap and dust. "Hello, Myrtle," she called softly to the weeping ghost. It was a habit of hers to do this every time she had to use this restroom. It felt rude not to. In response, Myrtle gave a watery hiccup, but otherwise did not reply. Ginny went to the sink and began the process of washing her face, when suddenly the door opened, and she looked up and into the mirror above her head to see if it was Hermione, and stopped dead. Blaise Zabini came walking into the bathroom, wearing an elegant set of patterned green robes over a dark red shift. Abruptly, Ginny turned off the water and turned to face the other girl. "Merlin's beard," she exclaimed, utterly surprised. "What on earth are you doing here?" Blaze's eyes were very wide, as if she was just as surprised to see Ginny as she was surprised to see her. Then her expression went blank and haughty. "If you must know, I came to see Draco." "What about?" Ginny asked. "That's really none of your business, is it?" replied the Slytherin girl, as she strode to another mirror and pulled out a tube of ordinary lipstick from a pocket of her robes. Ginny raised an eyebrow. "All right, then, don't tell me. But since we're alone together, for a moment, why don't you explain what you know about Ron and Pansy?" Blaze, looking absolutely shocked, rounded on her, her earrings swinging. "Nothing," she said, although Ginny noticed with some satisfaction that her voice had risen several octaves. Ginny crossed her arms over her chest and looked squarely at the other girl. "Draco already gave us the dirty details, but I think you might know more than he guesses. So, let's make a deal. You talk, and I won't cast a bat bogey hex on you." Blaze let out a long breath and seemed to sag against the sink she was leaning against. "Damn Draco," she said, her voice very flat. "Damn his little black heart to hell." Ginny waited, knowing that silence was sometimes the best weapon to be used on an enemy. Blaze nervously twisted a curl of red hair around her index finger. "It all started at the end of last summer," she said, her voice monotone. "Our parents started warning us that something was coming, and began dispensing protection charms to us. They were transfigured, jewelry for the girls, cufflinks and buttons for the boys. We had to wear them at all times. We were told not to give them to anyone else, or there would be dire consequences. I knew Draco wasn't to have any, or to be told what was going on. So I didn't tell him." "You didn't tell him?" Ginny burst out angrily. "He was your boyfriend." Blaze laughed dryly. "That's what Pansy said, at first. But then she started sleeping with your brother." "I know," Ginny said. "But why?" "She wasn't supposed to sleep with him," Blaze clarified. "She was supposed to disguise herself as Granger and get information. But Pansy always was a little overzealous. I doubt her father's very pleased with her at the moment, especially since she developed a perfectly ridiculous crush on your brother and insisted on giving him one of the protection charms. I thought she wasn't allowed to do that. She wasn't. She decided to make her own, and that," Blaze said with some relish, as if she were telling a particularly gruesome ghost story, "is pretty dark magic, let me tell you." "But they're just protection charms," said Ginny. "The only way to protect against dark magic is to engage in dark magic," Blaze said. "And this type of protection charm requires some part of a dark creature. Acromantella feet, kelpie hair, incubus blood. Pansy decided to make a charm out of basilisk eyes. It was the strongest kind of charm there was." Ginny suppressed a shudder. Her experience with basilisks had not been a positive one. She would have needed a basilisk, though. "Oh, she made one," Blaze replied airily. "She... what?" "Well, all you really need is a chicken egg, a toad, and a strong stomach." "A toad?" Ginny goggled. "Oh, Trevor." Terrible name for a toad, said Blaze dispassionately. Anyway, she made a baby basilisk, killed it before it got large enough to be dangerous, and took its eyes to make the cloak pin she gave to your brother, and used coercion magic to make sure no one would find out about the two of them. She's completely mad, Ginny said. She ought to be locked up. Then she paused. Is that why Malcolm got stunned? Because of coercion magic? I suspect so, said Blaze. But then you lot found out the truth about him and Pansy anyway. I don't get it, Ginny said in a stunned voice. I thought you were friends with Pansy. I am. I was. Until I found out she was the one who shot Draco with that arrow. She what? Ginny's grip on her own arms tightened. Mr. Malfoy ordered her to do it, I think, Blaze said. Look, I really don't know much about it, and I can't tell you much more. I don't want to get anyone else in trouble besides Pansy. Ginny felt a nasty smile tug at the corner of her mouth. Because it would hurt your Slytherin pride? Blaze's eyes snapped wide open. You don't know anything about me, so don't pretend that you do, you Gryffindors. You don't understand capriciousness or complications. Everything's so straightforward for you. Blaze's head went up, and Ginny suspected that she had struck some kind of nerve. Never mind. I've told you what I know. It's up to you what you do with it. Wait. She moved to block her from the door. And Blaze stopped and looked at her angrily. I want you to stay and tell Dumbledore and Professor Snape what you've just told me. Blaze looked horrified. Run to a teacher? I would never. It's not running, Ginny said defiantly. Snape used to be a Death Eater. He'll know what to do. Blaze's chest was rising and falling swiftly. I didn't come here to betray all my friends to you. Then why did you come here? Ginny retorted, her tone curt. The other girl replied without looking at her. I told you, I want to talk to Draco. If you really want him to trust you enough to talk to you, Ginny began again, then you'll talk to Snape. He will know all sorts of questions to ask that I couldn't possibly think of. Blaze's eyes were full of angry tears. She swiped at them hastily with the back of her hand, smearing her eye makeup. Fine, she said. I'll talk to Professor Snape, but... But what? I need a drink, Blaze said, and sniffled. Ginny started to smile. There's a bottle of Ogen's old fire whiskey in Dean Thomas's trunk upstairs. Will that do? Blaze returned the smile. It was the first time Ginny had ever seen her really smile, and the difference was profound. When she really smiled, she had dimples. That'll do just fine. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and Hermione had just finished with Snape in the potions dungeon. He'd forced her to make the antidote mixture no less than 5 times, until her methodology was perfect. Hermione had almost enjoyed the experience. She had always liked being able to lose herself in the solution to a problem. It was not until she left the dungeon, a box filled with the ingredients needed to make a fortnight's worth of antidote in her arms, that she again wondered where Draco had gone. In despair, she went back to the common room, trying not to think about what Draco might be doing, and she didn't want to think about Harry either. As it happened, at that precise moment, the portrait hole swung wide open. Ginny and Blaze also stepped into the room. Blaze, Hermione said, her tone very sharp and irritable. What are you doing here? Ginny, why did you let her in? Wait. She paused and regarded her fellow Gryffindor with suspicion. "You are Ginny Weasley, aren't you?" Ginny rolled her eyes. "I understand why you'd be suspicious, Hermione, but yes, it's me. Blaise just came back to Hogwarts to talk to Draco." "And that somehow gives her the right to be in our common room?" the other girl snapped. "Calm down, Granger," Blaise said, as she took in the coziness of the room and sneered. "Trust me, I want to be in here about as much as you want me here." Hermione was unfazed. "You might want to talk to Draco, but I don't know where he is at the moment." Blaise opened her mouth to make a cutting remark, but at that moment the portrait hole swung open once more, and Draco himself stepped into the room. For a second, they all stood, frozen, completely unsure what to do. Hermione stared at Draco, and he looked back and forth from her to Ginny to Blaise, an inquiring look on his face. She wasn't sure what she had expected exactly. Some sign of terrific inner turmoil or disquiet? If it had been Harry, whatever he was feeling would have been written all over his face. But it was Draco, and his face was unreadable. The only thing she noticed was that he appeared to be wearing gloves, which Hermione noted was an odd thing to do. It was warm in the room, and she could not imagine why he was wearing them indoors. Perhaps he had taken a walk around the lake to clear his head? "Draco," she said finally, "where have you been?" "Thinking," he said, and flung himself into the armchair opposite the fire, and stretched his long legs out until his feet rested on an ottoman near it. "What are you lot doing here?" he asked, with a pointed look at Blaise. "She came here to talk to you," Ginny said by way of explanation, and Blaise shot her a look which she studiously ignored. "About what?" he asked, evidencing no response. His face was a study in utter blankness. Blaise tightened her lips. "I was hoping we could do this alone," she said, and Ginny could tell that she hated begging, and looked at Hermione. "Come on," she said to the other girl. "I promised Blaise some of Dean's stash of Ogin's old fire whiskey. Help me find it." And before Hermione could protest, Ginny had taken a step forward, grabbed the other girl by the wrist, and began to march her decidedly towards the stairs. After they had gone, Draco stared at Blaise with unnerving fierceness in his eyes. "Say your piece, Savini." "I didn't want things to end the way they did between us the last time we saw each other," she said quietly. "So I came here to say what I've been wanting to say for a while now." "So, you have something to say that doesn't have anything to do with money, hair, or cosmetic charms? That's a bloody first." Blaise blinked. This was unprecedentedly vicious, even for Draco. She fought the urge to slap his face and walk away, but she couldn't. She loved him too much. Why did it have to be him, of all people? There was nothing special, or interesting, or different about falling in love with the best-looking boy in school, who was also rich, who was also popular, who was also captain of the Slytherin Quidditch team. It was predictable and stupid, and she had done it just the same. Draco smiled at her, but it was not a pleasant smile. "The look on your face," he said. "So concerned. You're worried about me. That's awfully cute. Tell me, Blaise, would you still love me if I were mad?" Blaise gaped at him in mingled consternation and fury. She had always wondered, half hoped, that he knew how she felt about him. She had assumed he didn't. That he did know was infuriating to her. The fragile tether of her patience snapped, and she drew herself upright. "Of course I love you, she spat. But just because you love someone doesn't mean you don't see what they are. There, now I've said it. And if you die tomorrow, then I won't live the rest of my life regretting not having said it. Draco had gone quiet. The sort of quietness that was like a yell or an interruption. He looked away from her, then said in a soft voice, "It never occurred to me before that what I did to you was wrong." He looked at her, and she had the feeling that for the first time he actually saw her. "I'm sorry about that." For a moment she could not react. Part of her did not want to accept his apology. It seemed too little a thing in the face of how much he had made her love him, and how angry she still was. On the other hand, she had to accept that perhaps he had not made her love him. She had decided to love him, because he had helped her family, because he was beautiful, because she was restless and wanted something, and he seemed like a solution. A blush started to creep into her cheeks, and she turned away from him to glance up the stairs. "Where are Weasley and Granger with that fire whiskey?" she asked, feeling self-conscious. An odd softness came into his eyes as he looked at her. "I'm surprised at you," he said, needing liquid courage to talk to me. "I don't care what you think," she said. "I still love you, and I don't care if you love me back. You're selfish and spoilt, and you probably don't deserve it. But I do love you, and that matters to me because it's mine." He had ducked his head, but was still looking at her. His face was so familiar, but still a stranger's. She knew the funny little white scar under his eye, but not how he had gotten it. Then, to her surprise, he stood up and reached across the aisle between them to touch the side of her face lightly with his hand, lifting her hair away, and kissed her cheek. It wasn't a romantic gesture, but it surprised her all the same. "Thank you," he said. She opened her mouth to ask what he was thanking her for, when a sound on the staircase caused both of them to turn, and he dropped his hand quickly as Hermione and Ginny returned, the latter holding the bottle of fire whiskey and looking inquiring. "I couldn't find any cups, so I hope you don't mind taking it straight from the bottle," Ginny said. Blaise gave an odd little smile. "I don't mind at all." "I seem to be missing something," said Draco. "Is there a reason we're getting sauced on Dean's hidden stash?" Ginny gave a brief rundown of the plan that she and Blaise had agreed on about going to Dumbledore and Snape and telling them what she knew. In answer, Draco raised an eyebrow and looked at Blaise. "Well, well," he said. "Never in all my days did I think that you would ever tattle to a teacher." "Shut up, Malfoy," Blaise replied succinctly, but there was no rancor in it, and she studiously plucked the bottle out of Ginny's unresisting hands, popped the cork, and took a healthy swig. They all stared at her, clearly impressed that she could drink it down without so much as a hiccup of protest. "As much as I would love to stand here and watch these proceedings," Draco said, "I think we ought to discuss our game plan," he said. "Game plan?" Hermione echoed faintly, turning away from Blaise to stare at him. "Well, yes. I mean, we've got to find Potter, don't we?" "He said he didn't want to be followed, though," Ginny pointed out. "I understand that," Draco returned, "and normally I'd say we should all just let him go. After all, he seems to have a decent handle on the situation, wouldn't you say? And heroic rescues are awfully embarrassing if you're rescuing someone who isn't actually in danger." Ginny was taken aback by the force of his vehemence, and Blaise narrowed her eyes. Is Potter missing? She asked, sounding both bored and surprised all at the same time. In a matter of speaking, Draco replied, but his tone said clearly that he didn't want to go into the details, so Blaise just shrugged and took another swig of fire whiskey. Hermione said nothing. Oddly, she had been prepared for him to suggest this, but didn't expect him to be so rational, as if his friends ran off towards certain death every day. Finally, she said, I think you'd better tell us about your game plan. All right, he said, and turned towards the fireplace. The light in the grate danced along the curve of his mouth as he talked, the line of the full lower lip marked as if he had bitten it. He might not be letting me into his mind these days, but I can still think like he does. He left his firebolt behind, so he didn't go anywhere by broomstick. He could have used flue powder, but I know he hates that. And besides, flue networks can be tampered with. I would imagine he took the train, either from Hogsmeade or from one of the Muggle villages along the train route to London. We've taken that ourselves, if you recall. I recall, said Hermione, and I'd pretty much come to that conclusion too. The question, of course, did he get off the train? London, said Ginny promptly, and they all turned to look at her. He's familiar enough with it, isn't he? And it's big enough that he could lose himself in it. That's true, said Hermione. Diagon Alley has whatever he might need, and he will need money. He never brings enough to school, and he always has to owl for extra if he wants to buy anything. He wouldn't walk into Gringotts as Harry Potter, Draco pointed out. He's not that dense. And he wouldn't stay at the Leaky Cauldron. He'd find somewhere that they wouldn't recognize him on sight. I wish I had a map of Wizarding London, said Hermione, her mind busy now, ticking over possibilities. Draco looked thoughtful. I have a map of Wizarding strip clubs, but I doubt that will be all that useful to you. A map of Wizarding strip clubs, Ginny repeated, surprised despite herself. Fantastic breasts and where to find them. You can borrow it if you think it would help. I don't think Harry went to a strip club. Who knows? Draco's voice was careless. That boy is apparently full of surprises. I have a question, said Blaise, who was now sitting on one of the Gryffindor chairs and balancing the bottle of fire whiskey on her knees. What are you going to do when you find him? Draco blinked at her. Bring him back here, I guess. Do you think we should go somewhere else? No, I didn't mean that. I mean, what are you going to do? Draco narrowed his eyes at her. Are you asking me if I'm going to hurt him? He said. Hermione felt herself tense at the question, but Blaise just continued to stare at him, waiting. No, I won't hurt him. He lowered his eyelids, which were a shade darker than his hair, a tarnished color. And for your information, I want to find him to make sure he's all right, to bring him back safe, because I promised I'd look after him, didn't I? And here he shot Hermione a look she couldn't read, but felt her heart contract with guilt. And I will. Hermione blinked at him. What? Stay with him, Draco said. Don't you remember? Stay with him always, and watch him, and make sure he's all right. Don't leave him, and don't let him go off on his own, and if he does, you have to follow him. Promise me, Draco. His voice had a savage twist to it. I didn't think this would happen, she said quietly. When I made you promise, I thought I might not be there to protect him, and that you would be. You don't have to, but I do, he said. I don't get out of that. I could release you from it, Hermione, said Ginny very gently. I know you didn't mean to do what you did, but you can't take it back. A vow like that is old magic. Hermione wound her fingers nervously together and said nothing. How could she have known what that promise would mean? She guessed she had been foolish and hadn't cared to think. The room was silent for a long while. Then finally, Hermione asked what she had meant to ask the second he had come in. Draco, what did you do to your hands? His shoulders tensed. I think we should start with Gringotts, he said, ignoring her question. At least we can alert them to look for Harry. The leaky cauldron, too. He'd cover his scar, I think. Maybe take his glasses off. But I don't think he realizes how recognizable his face is. Sounds like Potter isn't very good at running away, Blaise said lazily, and Hermione shot her an irritated glare, then looked back to Draco. I'm going to the Owlry, she told him calmly, to send a letter to Gringotts, and then we can be on our way. I'm going to stay here with Blaise, said Ginny firmly, and the other girl looked up at that. Well, I wouldn't want you to think that you had to face our professors alone. Thanks, Blaise said, and Draco could tell she meant it. All right, let's go, Hermione said impatiently. We're wasting our time sitting around here. You go on ahead, Draco replied abruptly. I want to talk to Ginny for a minute. Alone. And he glanced at Blaise, who rolled her eyes. All right, she said, and rose from the sofa so elegantly Hermione would never have known that she had been swigging fire whiskey at all. But mind you don't take too long, she added, as she began to follow Hermione out the portrait hall. I don't like the idea of being alone in the hall in an empty school. It's creepy. Suddenly, Hermione halted in front of Blaise and raised her chin. I just wanted you to know before I leave that I'm wearing that beret you gave me the last time we talked. And without preamble, she pushed a dark curl of her hair back so that Blaise could see the glitter of it caught in her hair. Good, said Blaise as they stepped outside into the hall. It's nice to know all Gryffindors aren't as moronic as they look. As soon as the portrait hole swung shut, a silence descended on the room, and Ginny waited for him to break it. She had no idea what he wanted to say to her, but the stress of the day told her that she should wait until he was ready to speak. Slowly, he turned to face her and reached out and tugged gently on a lock of her bright hair. It should have been you that I fell for first, he said softly, but I suspect we can't change that past, can we? Struck by his candor, Ginny's mouth opened a little in surprise. No, but when this is all over, perhaps we could try again? Incredibly, the corner of his mouth curved into a ghost of a smile. I'd like that. She reached up then and brushed the hair out of his eyes. I'm worried, she said. We'll find him, said Draco. Don't worry about Harry. I wasn't worrying about Harry. She began to lower her hand, but Draco caught it lightly and turned it over, palm up, and kissed the inside of her wrist. He kept his hand on her, feeling the faint pulse of her blood even through the gloves he wore. Her heartbeat was steady and rapid. She was so very alive, even at the heart of all the disasters collapsing around them. Some part of him envied her. Draco? Yes? It'll just be you and Hermione out there for a while, she said. He raised an eyebrow. And, while You are. I want you two to work it out. Work out what? He asked, although he suspected that he knew. Harry's gone, she said, her voice suddenly flint hard. And if I know him, he won't make it easy for you to find him. But with him gone, you won't know who you are anymore. So, when you find that out, maybe you'll finally know what you really want. Do what you have to do, and don't worry about the rest of us. I'll catch up to you two later. He looked down at her, and used his other hand to stroke the edges of her red hair. He had not lied when he said he had a weakness for it, like he had a weakness for all beautiful things. Sunsets, and expensive clothes, and beautiful places. In the fading light that was coming through the window, her hair was nearly the exact color of blood, edged with fainter gold where the light outlined it. And it was in that moment that he chose to lean down quickly and kissed her. Quotes. Scrumdiddlyumptious bar is from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but probably not that one because that's the book. And that is all for this chapter, guys. Thank you so much for joining me. If you are new here to the channel, welcome. This is quite normal for me to do, reading these types of things. The banner that I wrote a few years ago still stays true. I kind of love that I chose something and I didn't have to change it. Sorry, side tangent. But yes, like, comment, share, subscribe to the channel. And if you are interested in supporting me monetarily, I do have a Ko-fi and a Patreon linked here in my About page on YouTube. My Patreon does have a free option, so if you would like to do that, I do release my art and sometimes even pop culture hot takes on there, so you can have those videos that I do not actually post here on YouTube for all to see. So there is that portion of it. And yeah, thank you guys so much again, and I will see you all in the next one. Good night.